Hello everyone, Sam here, and we gotta talk about Hunter Quatermain stories. Uh, this was a story written by H. Rider Haggard, and the collection I have here has it. It's Smith and the Pharaohs and Other Stories from Starkhouse Press. Uh, but the story itself, Hunter Quatermain's story, was of course written by H. Rider Haggard, and is actually a sequel to King Solomon's Mines. It was the second story in the Allan Quatermain saga, the second release story, and it was a short story. It wasn't a novel. And interestingly enough, it was originally published in 1885, and it was actually in a charity collection. This collection was called In a Good Cause, a collection of stories, poems, and illustrations. And this was a charity anthology that was created to raise money for a hospital. My notes say it was the Northeastern Hospital for Children in London. So H. Rider Haggard wrote this story and put it in this collection for that charity anthology. But that is not the place most people have read it from. Most people read it from a later short story collection that Haggard put out called Allan's Wife and Other Tales in 1889. And that was a collection of one novel, Allan's Wife, and a couple of Allan Quatermain short stories. And that is where most people have read it from. And as I said before, this story takes place pretty soon after King Solomon's Mines, though the frame story is the sequel part, because it's shortly after the adventures and events of King Solomon's Mines. But the bulk of the story is Allan Quatermain telling about a story that happened 10 years before this point. So it's interesting that it's both a sequel and a prequel. Yeah. And I wasn't originally going to read this story. I wanted to read a Great White Hunter story for Jungle July. But going through the Great White Hunter stories I had on tap, I realized, well, a lot of these are going to take a little while to read. And I realized going through H. Rider Haggard's Allan Quatermain saga that the story that happens right after this one is not the sequel novel, Allan Quatermain. It was actually this story and another one called Long Odds. So I went, well, you know what? This is a shorter tale. I should probably just read this one for Jungle July. And so I did. Now, I actually read this before I went to Pulp Fest. I got this Haggard collection from Starkhouse Press. I bought this from Mike Chomko up at Pulp Fest. So I did not actually read the story from this collection. I read it from Project Gutenberg. But I'm using this just so I have something to hold, and eventually I'll be getting to some of the other Allan Quatermain stories in this one. So, yeah, I read this story partially out of convenience, but also partially because I wanted to see what the next step in Allan Quatermain's story was. So here we are. So the story of, well, Allan Quatermain's story is that it takes place not long after King Solomon's Mines. And Allan Quatermain, the Great White Hunter who has roamed much of Africa, he's returned to England, his home country, and he visits Sir Henry Curtis. Sir Henry Curtis was the man who hired Allan Quatermain to go on the expedition in King Solomon's Mines, and Allan Quatermain goes to Sir Henry's home in Yorkshire. And he goes for this soiree, this party. And the story is actually told from the perspective of a party guest who isn't named, but they and the rest of the partygoers are really curious to hear about Allan Quatermain, Sir Henry, and Captain Good's adventures. But all three of them are kind of demur from talking about the adventures regarding the mines. In fact, a little bit of interesting playing with the fourth wall. They say, "Oh, it's going to be coming out in book form," because in King Solomon's Mines, it was framed as the memoirs of Allan Quatermain about the adventure, and he gave it to his son to figure out, well, do you want to publish this, or you can publish this, or you can keep it to yourself. I'll leave it up to you. And apparently he decides to publish it. So because of that, they don't want to talk too much about the adventure because everybody's going to know about it soon. So instead, Allan finds a tactful way to tell him about a different event. And he looks to Sir Henry's wall of killed beasts that are stuffed on the wall, and he points out this buffalo on Sir Henry's wall that has a chipped horn. And he remarks that that particular buffalo was not gotten by Sir Henry, but by Allan Quatermain, and he gave it to Sir Henry. And then Allan relates this incident 10 years earlier, where he and his men were hunting in Africa for elephants. But the elephant hunt goes wrong, and Allan and his remaining men are forced to start marching 300 miles to safety. They were really far out, and they have to march 300 miles to safety with very little supplies. So not only do they have to deal with the long march in the African heat, they have to worry about fever, because Allan catches a fever, a group of hungry lions that are stalking them, and a particularly persistent and vicious buffalo. So this incident is just everything going wrong, and Allan Quatermain describing how he got out of it. So that's the essential plot. I think, to start off, what I think works about the story is that I think it's actually a pretty solid epilogue for King Solomon's Mines, because it does a good job of showing how Allan and Sir Henry and Captain Good have made it out of the expedition. We see, Sir Henry, he was already kind of wealthy, but now the diamonds have made him hugely wealthy. Allan is like now essentially a gentleman, because he got a portion of the diamonds, and he's well-to-do now. And it's just kind of this interesting thing of like, oh yeah, this is where the characters have ended up at this point in their lives, because they're now fabulously rich. So I think it's a pretty good epilogue for King Solomon's Mines, showing how they ended up here. I also really liked how Haggard finds a clever way to utilize Quatermain's age. Because one of the things I mentioned in my King Solomon's Mines review is that it was kind of interesting that Haggard made Allan Quatermain rather aged. Like, he wasn't quite elderly, but he was well into his mid-50s, and not the typical dashing, hero that a lot of stories would have made him. They would have made him younger, like in his 20s or maybe his mid-30s. But the fact that he's almost into elderly age was kind of an interesting choice by Haggard. And because he's been a hunter for so long, you have to go, oh, yeah, he probably would have some hunting stories, given how long he's been hunting. And so it's kind of an interesting thing where Haggard goes, oh, actually, I can use Allan Quatermain's character background as a hunter and his age, and can sort of reach back into the past with that. And that actually becomes a huge aspect of the Allan Quatermain stories going forward, because King Solomon's Mines and Allan Quatermain are technically towards the end of his life. Slight spoiler, but these are two of the earliest Allan Quatermain stories, and most of the stories going forward are prequels. They flash back to things Allan did in his past. So this story is actually very important for setting up that template of stories where Allan is reflecting on the past, or we're seeing a past adventure. So this story is actually very important to setting that template and essentially providing the means that Haggard will tell most of the Allan Quatermain stories going forward. So again, it seems like something that's really simplistic and obvious, but it could have gone wrong if H. Rider Haggard hadn't established Allan Quatermain in such a strong way in King Solomon's Mines and figured out a way of being like, okay, this guy can have a long life history, even if we're towards the end of his story canonically. So yeah, it's a very cool way to keep Allan's story going. I also think that Haggard was wise to choose the simplest story that an aged hunter could tell, which is simply a hunt gone wrong. Like, it's a very simplistic idea, but it's kind of the most natural idea that one would probably think of when you deal with a flashback in a hunter's life. And sometimes doing the most obvious and simplest story concept is the best way to do it. Because remember, this is only Haggard's second Allan Quatermain story. He still hasn't quite gone into the other elements that he will later in the story with, like, the drug. I know there's a drug that, like, lets Allan see past lives and things like that. But he doesn't. But Haggard wisely doesn't get too crazy here. He just goes, okay, simple story of a hunt gone wrong. And I think that very much grounds the tale and makes it much more investing, because we're not seeing the fantastical Kukana land from King Solomon's Mines. We're just seeing something that any hunter could have experienced. And I also like that the story does a very good job of events building on top of each other, and this terrible situation just getting worse because of the natural consequences that happen from each action. Because the story starts when Quatermain and his group lose their wagon. Their supply wagon catches on fire. Then as they're marching to safety, Allan Quatermain gets a fever. And because he has a fever, he has to lie next to near a watering hole they find. But because they're near a watering hole, the lions show up, as well as the buffalo. So it's kind of this thing of, like, yeah, everything goes wrong, but the escalation makes sense. It's not a thing where something just comes out of nowhere to make things bad. It's like, no, the march is bad because they have no supplies. They're getting sick, and they happen to be right in the one area where every single animal within 50 miles is going to be coming to. So it's a believable escalation. I also liked how the story does not immediately jump into the lions and the buffalo going for Allan and his men. There actually is this good amount of tension where Allan and his Zulu companion named Mashuni they start noticing the lions, and initially, the lions are staying off to a bit, but they start noticing the lions keep creeping a little bit closer. They start getting a little too comfortable with the humans being nearby, and you just get this sense going that, this is going to pop in a minute. Like these lions are going to do something that forces action, and they do. And we actually get a very cool scene of how Allan and Mushuni actually think of, well, how do we protect ourselves from these lions when we don't have much ammunition? So that's a very good section of the story that's tense, but you also get to see Allan and Mushuni's cleverness, how they make sure these lions don't get them. And speaking of Mashuni, as I mentioned, he's Allan Quatermain's main companion throughout the story, and he has a lot of good characterization because he's meant to be sort of a Zulu type with a strong warrior culture, but despite the fact that he's supposed to be a warrior, he's very nervous and shaken. He's not necessarily, I don't think he's framed as young, but he kind of has the vibe of like the Zulu warrior kind who is just maybe hasn't been as exposed to certain battles like some of his brethren are. And so he actually is very noticeably and visibly scared throughout this affair, but he does go out of his way to help Allan. He doesn't leave him to die like a lot of the other men and servants do. So he does have this very strong character growth where he's scared out of his mind, but he's trying to do the right thing, even though he knows it might not end well for him. So he's actually a very good character in that respect. I also really liked, I keep talking about the lions, but the buffalo, who is theoretically the main antagonist for the story. There is a final battle with him, where Allan and Mashuni have to do battle with him, and it is a very brutal battle. It was much more brutal than I was expecting, and it's one where both parties are just going at it. The buffalo and Allan and Mashuni, they're all just throwing everything at each other, and the winner more or less wins simply by sheer perseverance and grit, and it's not a fun affair. It is depicted as nasty and brutal as a fight with a wild animal would be. And there's this great moment during the fight where Allan gets knocked down, and the buffalo is running to gore him, and he has to actually climb inside this porcupine den that happens to be near this dead tree. And there's this thing where the buffalo is actually shoving its head in to try and gore Allan even. And Allan just has this very tiny space to shove himself in. And it's just this this very tense scene where you're like, if Allan makes one wrong move, those horns are going into him. So that's a very effective, intense scene. I also like that this story highlights how vicious buffalo can be. Because there was a news story a couple weeks ago about like some people at Yellowstone National Park who got too close to a male buffalo, and he caught one of them and flung them up like uh, 15 feet in the air. And I know that was an American buffalo, a bison, if you want to be technical. But I've heard lots of stories about African buffalo being just as bad, and some would argue even worse, because apparently there was some video I saw about how African buffalo will be absolutely vicious and mean, and how a lot of hunters in Africa don't want to go near them because they're so brutal and mean. So I like that this story kind of highlighted, yeah, you don't want to mess with a buffalo. In fact, in this story, the lions are dangerous, but it's the buffalo who really give Allan and his gang the problem. So, again, I like that it's not the most obvious antagonist that a lot of writers would go for, a lion in the savannah. They just go, no, it's a buffalo, but a buffalo is very, very angry and vicious. So I like that Haggard highlights that. I also like that this story sort of contrasts King Solomon's Mines, because King Solomon's Mines ends like very triumphantly. Things were rough going through it, but there's a triumphant end. Even one person that everybody thought was dead turns out to be alive. Like, it's a very positive, uplifting ending. But this story is the exact opposite. It ends on a very tragic and downbeat note. And I won't spoil why, but the ending lines of the story are just Allan Quatermain breaking down and crying about everything that's happened once it's over. And it's actually, I also really like it because it kind of explains why Allan Quatermain at the beginning of King Solomon's Mines kind of seemed burnt out. Like, that was kind of the characterization he had in that first novel, where he was pretty reluctant to take on Sir Henry and Captain Good's quest, because he just kind of seemed like he was at that point in his life where he was hunting because he didn't really know what else to do with his life. He was good at it, but he was kind of getting fed up with it, or like the romance was kind of lost. And I think this story, it does a good job at like hinting at why Allan was so burnt out. Like, I wouldn't say this is the only reason, but you could see how a man who had experiences like this throughout his long career would kind of get burnt out with that career. And I think it's actually kind of clever how at the end of the King Solomon's Mines, Allan sends some of the trophies with Sir Henry when Sir Henry goes back to England. And Haggard, again, Haggard sort of does a retcon. This buffalo isn't mentioned at the end of King Solomon's Mines with the things sent to Sir Henry, but it makes sense. You could just say, Allan Quatermain sent it later. And this story really does show you why Allan had that buffalo head for so long, but why he didn't want to see it anymore. So again, it expands on Allan's character as it was in the first novel, but it also doesn't necessarily feel inconsistent with how he was portrayed in that first novel. So, yeah, I actually really like that the ending is so downbeat. Kind of interesting that Haggard put such a downbeat story in a charity anthology, but, you know, maybe that was... but sometimes the art doesn't promote a happy ending, so it still very much works for the story. So that was what I really liked about the story. But there are a few things I think don't entirely work for the story. The one that really bugged me the most was the inciting incident, which is while Allan and a couple of his men are out hunting, some of the servants that stayed behind with the supply wagon, through some weird incident, accidentally end up burning the wagon. And then they run off because they're scared of Allan's reaction. And Allan admits he's not sure how it happened, but he has a suspicion that it was either the natives got lazy and didn't burn the grass around the supply wagon to keep a wildfire from getting it, or somebody was doing something with fire nearby that caused it. But essentially, however it happened, his native bearers kind of mucked things up with the wagon. And that's always kind of a weird... I don't really like stories that are incited by accidents caused by stupidity, because this is obviously it's a bit of the colonialist mindset, like Allan Quatermain, and basically says these natives they mess things up, and it's like, okay, yeah, colonialist mindset, that's a feature in a lot of these stories, but what bugged me about it is just that I really don't like stories that are incited by somebody doing something stupid, because, yes, I'm aware that people in real life do stupid things all the time, and terrible things happen because of that, but this just kind of felt like, but in fiction, it can be a very tough line to do, because sometimes stupidity that you would see in real life feels weird when it's in fiction, because you kind of go, well, wait, wouldn't these people be aware of what this was or what was going on? Like, wouldn't these natives be aware that you had to be careful about long dead grass because it could catch fire? It's like wildfires existed before the colonial powers showed up. So even putting aside the colonialist slant, it just doesn't feel like something that would have reasonably happened, and it just kind of feels like, okay, Haggard's like, I need an excuse for why Quatermain is in a tough spot. All of his supplies are gone. How are they gone? Did someone steal them? No, it burnt down. Through some accident that Quatermain doesn't fully know happened because he was away, so he's just conjecturing. So, yeah, that element of the inciting incident felt a little hackneyed to me. I'm like, I feel like you could have found a more interesting and creative way to do that, other than, the native bearers messed up. It's kind of like, you could have found a more interesting dilemma or a reason for that happening. The second thing that bugged me is that this is a weird thing. It wasn't until later I thought about it and I realized, oh, wait, what about that? And then what bugged me was that Sir Henry's brother doesn't show up. Because for those that don't know, in King Solomon's Mines, one of the main reasons Sir Henry contracted Allan Quatermain was to go and find his lost brother. And slight spoiler, they do find the brother in the events of King Solomon's Mines. But he doesn't really show up in this story. Sir Henry shows up, Captain Good shows up, but the brother doesn't, which I thought was kind of strange because that was the big emotional component to Sir Henry's side of the story. So I kind of was like, well, wait, why don't we see what happened with the brother, see how he's doing in life, because, you know, he'd been trapped away from his family for like, I think it was like 2 years or something. It was a long time. And I was kind of like, man, I really wanted to see how he was dealing with everything that happened. And how he's getting by in the world. So I was kind of bummed that Haggard didn't really show him in this situation. So now, final ranking of Hunter Quatermain's story. I rank on the 5-star system, 0 out of 5 being the worst, 5 out of 5 being the best. And this one was very easy. It was a 5 out of 5. This was just a great story all around. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I have some nitpicks with it. Like, I kind of wish the Sir Henry brother was more in it. I wish the inciting incident had been a little stronger. But everything else, I think, works really well. As I said, it's a very good epilogue to King Solomon's Mines. I think it's just a good adventure tale in its own right. I could see many people enjoying this, even if they had no idea about Allan Quatermain or King Solomon's Mines. So, yeah, it's just a strong story. It's just, I don't know what else to say other than it's very good. So if you are a Allan Quatermain fan, you should definitely check it out. If you're into Great White Hunter stories, this is a good one because it kind of shows a more cynical side to the Great White Hunter. It's not as majestic or romantic as a lot of other stories would portray it. And for as much as Haggard gets credited with that image of the Great White Hunter with Allan Quatermain, in this second story, he's already sort of showing the cracks in the romantic portrayal of Great White Hunters, because things don't go well for Allan in this story. And you could actually make an argument he doesn't fully get over what happens. So, yeah, I really recommend it. It is in this Stark House press release, Smith and Farrows and the other stories, but it is also on Project Gutenberg. I'm going to leave a link in the description for anyone who wants to read it. That's how I actually read it before I got this edition. So check it out if it looks interesting. Any inspiration? For those that don't know, I'm a working writer, and whenever I do these story reviews, I like to talk about whether they've inspired me for any of my fiction. And I do like the idea of a story about a hunt that goes wrong due to a mixture of human folly and nature's inhospitality. I like that idea of a hunt that will go terribly wrong just due to human stupidity and nature's inhospitality. I would probably try to find a way to do a better human stupidity than what I talked about for this tale, but I think there is something to be said about a tale of a man kind of becoming his own worst enemy during a hunt rather than all the animals. So if I was doing it, it would probably be a Florida version, probably something with like a gator hunt or something, because there's a lot of gator hunting down here. So they are just as mean as buffalo. So nobody would be surprised if a gator attack happens during a gator hunt. All right, well, that is all I really have to say about Hunter Quatermain's story. I will be doing one other Quatermain story for Jungle July, one of my last Jungle July reviews this week. I think it's the one titled Long Odds. It's about Quatermain fighting a lion. And I want to review that one because that's the third story in the Allan Quatermain cycle. And then the fourth one is the novel, Allan Quatermain. So I figure I might as well read it just so I can hop to Allan Quatermain at some point. So that's what I'll aim to do. And there'll also be 2 other reviews for Rocket Summer. One was Lorelei of the Red Mist, and the second was War of the Worlds. So you can watch for those this coming weekend. So thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I will see you all later. Bye.